Today we're going to be talking about Saint Joseph, husband to Mary. This is the second part of saints, and we're going to be talking about Saint Joseph, the hidden saint, the worker. This is an icon describing that he was a worker. His role was to provide for the family of Nazareth, the Holy Family, and he was a carpenter. He worked with stone and wood. And I'm going to be taking this information that I'll be using today's PowerPoint from the apostolic letter from our Holy Father, St. John Paul II. And he wrote this very important letter to inform us a little more about this hidden saint that's not that much has been written or spoken about. And I'd like to introduce you to the two greatest saints in the church. It'd be Joseph and Mary, bringing forth this Son of God, this God who became incarnate, took on human flesh to show us and lead us back to God's family and back to the original plan that God had for us all. This is the table of contents that I'll be talking about today, and the area of what is marriage, how marriage is a sanctuary of love, what is fatherhood, and how important work is in our everyday life. Sometimes we just think it's something that's kind of like grudge work, but actually it's part of us to express our vocation and to express doing God's will in our everyday life. So today we'll start talking about Jesus is Joseph's son by virtue of marriage. Now, the son of Mary is also Joseph's son because when Joseph was approached by the angel to say not to be afraid to take Mary, who's already found to be with child in her womb, Joseph was already married. The first part, there's two parts to a Jewish betrothal. The first part, where there's a ceremony and they are married, but then they separate for about almost up to a year, and they provide and get ready for a home. And so Mary was found to be pregnant after the first part of the betrothal. And when Joseph found out that she was pregnant, it made it very difficult for Joseph to understand, because I'm not going to go into it right now because we don't have time, but I want to explain that by reason of their faithful marriage together, they are both Jesus' parents by juridical law, because in the marriage sacrament, Jesus came into the middle, you might say, of Joseph and Mary's betrothal. So even though Joseph is not the biological father, he is given all the rights and responsibilities of a father in a marriage. And the Gospels clearly describe the fatherly responsibility of Joseph, and it spoke of Joseph as his father. Now, the nature of marriage is really supposed to be a sanctuary of love, where we learn to grow in love. And St. John Paul begins explaining at the beginning of the both New and Old Testament, there is a married couple. The first married couple was a source of evil that was unleashed upon the world. But the second married couple, St. John Paul says, is from which Joseph and Mary, from which the summit of holiness spreads all over the world. And the summit means a pinnacle, so their holiness spread throughout the whole world by their saying yes to God and God's will for them in their lives. And Jesus began his work of salvation in this family. And it's God's will that the family be the sanctuary of love and a cradle of love, where we learn to love one another, to forgive one another, and to work together. And then we go out as that little cell, you might say, of the community, goes out and spreads out into the larger community. Now, love is the essence and the role of the family. And so if we're going to be talking about the role of the family, You could say the family has a mission to guard love, to reveal love to one another, and to communicate love to one another. That is the, you might say, the special essence and role of the family. It's a little reflection of God's love for humanity. And we share in this love for each other. We're sharing in God's love. So the Holy Family, sometimes the church would have this fancy word, uh, ecclesia domestica, this domestic church. It's where this small family learns to live out the gospel and to love one another and to learn about God. And it was God's design that it was in the family that Jesus spent many long years hidden. And so the Holy Family is an example for all Christian families to live with one another, to love one another, to provide and share in God's love for each other. And here is a picture of Mary and Joseph where the family starts off with a young child, and the child learns that he is loved by the mother and father, and they are to show this child all their affection and love and attention. And that's where the child learns that he is lovable. Fatherhood is a very important topic today, and St. Joseph is a great model. It says St. Joseph was called to serve the person and the mission of Jesus directly through the exercise of his fatherhood. And John Paul would call him, he cooperated in the fullness of this great mystery, and he called him a minister of salvation, where he had a key role in serving God's kingdom by bringing forth and saying yes to bringing forth Jesus into their family. And his fatherhood is expressed concretely in his having made his life a service and a sacrifice of Jesus' mission. And he turned his life, you might say, of work and love and his vocation, he turned it all into a giving of himself, a total, you might say, oblation, where he offered up all of himself, his work, his union with Christ, and for the purposes of God. And every man has this ability to grow in holiness by surrendering their lives to God's kingdom and fulfilling it faithfully in their ordinary will that God puts before them by raising a family, or if not a family, by doing the work that God has put them to do, by loving those around them and giving of themselves to them around them. And Joseph says in Pope Pius XII's encyclical, Joseph receives a special gift of heaven. And you might say, what is this special gift of heaven? Well, it's talking about, Pius XII said, that it seems like Joseph has a special sublime task, and he needs the necessary qualities to fulfill this task of a father of Jesus, who is God incarnate, and Mary, who is a virgin without sin. And God gave him this special gift that only God could give. He gave him the gift of love, a father's love. And it was a grace-filled gift of love, that he could be a perfect father to Jesus, that he could show the Father's perfect love. And Joseph is also known as the patron of the universal church, because one pope at a difficult time in church history was invoking upon Saint Joseph and made him the patron of the universal church. A patron is someone who watches over, who protects, and who provides assistance. And this is what Saint Joseph was doing. He was helping the church, just like he helped the Holy Family provide and protect. So this Pope, I believe it was Pius X, who called upon Saint Joseph to be the universal church, patron of the universal church. And here, on this picture here, we see how May 1st, which we just recently passed, it's the feast day of Saint Joseph the Worker. And they emphasize the worker because he did work. His life's task was working with stone, working with wood, and providing for his family. and raising his son up in the task that he learned. Because every father, he always passed on the work to his son. He taught him the trade. He taught him how to be responsible. He taught him how to be skilled in this particular work. So Saint Joseph, it says stepfather, but I correct it on the bottom. It's more accurately to call him the virginal father. And it says a prayer here. Please continue to watch over us during this pandemic. May your prayers and intercession strengthen both our essential workers on the front line in the hospitals, as well those who are stuck at home, struggling from a lack of work. And here's a prayer to pray on to Saint Joseph to help us. He understands what it means, how difficult it is to provide for a family and how to find work, and at times it can be difficult. Work is also known as an expression of love in daily life. And the Gospels very simply says he was a carpenter. And this simple word sums up Joseph's entire life. For many years, Jesus was hidden in a household of Joseph and Mary. And it says in Luke that when he was found in the temple at the age of 12, he went down with them and came to be obedient with them. And that obedience, St. John Paul would say, is like submission. He was going to share in the work of Joseph and stay in their home until God was going to call him into his future ministry of being a preacher and healer and teacher of who God called him to be when he came to earth. So work is an expression of daily love. Now, work is also part of mankind's redemption. You can say he was known as the carpenter's son. Joseph's work was work with his hands. And then Jesus also learned to work with his hands. And so the church has emphasized, by instituting this liturgical memorial of St. Joseph the worker, that human work has a special prominence in the Gospels, especially manual labor. It says here, along with humanity of the Son of God, work too has been caught up in the mystery of the Incarnation, and also has been redeemed in a special way. So at the workbench, where he plied his trade together with Jesus, Joseph brought human work closer to the whole purpose of redemption, where our everyday life is doing God's will, whatever it may be. It's uniting, you might say, us within God's will for the salvation of all mankind. Just like Jesus spent 30 years hidden in Joseph's workshop, he was saving mankind by just doing the duty of the moment, by doing what God put before him. And we are following his example. We are to do what God has put before us, as studies, as a student, or a son in a family, participating in the work of the family, and to be a light to each other and forgiving and loving one another. So when we unite our work in union with Jesus, we are helping to save the world by doing our part of the prayer of your kingdom come, your will be done, through Christ's mystical body, the church. So work is part of mankind's redemption. And lastly, work is accepting and participating in salvation. So in human work, it says here, John Paul stated, in the human work, growth of Jesus in wisdom and age and grace was done by his industriousness, by his praying, by his studying, by his work. So you could say work is a human good which transforms nature and makes man, as John Paul would say, in a sense more human. The importance of work in human life demands that its meaning be known and assimilated into our lives. It says here in the letter, it says, help all people to come closer to God, the Creator and Redeemer, to participate in his salvific plan for man and the world, and to deepen friendship with Christ in their lives by accepting, through faith, a living participation in Christ's threefold mission as priest, prophet, and king. But to put more simply, it says, in short, whatever work we do, if united with Christ and done for him to the best of our ability, whether good or bad, we are sharing in God's redemptive plan for the world by accepting what our circumstances are asking of us to do at this moment of time. And most, or I should say some modern day saints, call this the duty of the moment. What has God put before you in your life to do? What is God asking you to do? And right now, a lot of you, he's asking you to be students and to be a part of your household at home, and to do what is asked of you by your mother and father, and to be a light to one another, and to forgive one another. And by doing our part, our duty of the moment, we share in somehow the mystical body's redemptive plan that God has put into the church to save the world by our actions, by our cooperating with God and doing our part in the history of salvation. All right, God bless, brothers. Don't forget your quiz to study for it before you take it. And take care. God bless. Bye-bye.